Hi, I hope you're doing okay. Right now, I'm going to take you with me on a long walking trip that I took through the olive groves, meadows, and medieval towns of southern Spain one recent springtime as part of the famous Camino de Santiago de Compostela. If things have been a little hectic or intense for you, you might want to take a few moments to yourself now for a couple of quiet, deep breaths to get comfy and to simmer down. Our journey starts in Seville or Sevilla, Spain. We have just a few days here to enjoy the sights of this southern Andalusian city before our long walk begins. The early spring weather has produced crisp, piercingly bright blue mornings and warm golden afternoons. The air is filled with the chatter of tourists and the impassioned string work and staccato stamp of busking flamenco musicians along the city's wide, tree-lined boulevards. We eat late breakfasts of baguette with olive oil, tomatoes, and salty, thinly sliced ham, and then wander the cobbled streets of the town centre at random. The bustle of the main roads quickly fades as we turn down unassuming side streets to find tall terraced houses squeezed shoulder to shoulder, painted in an array of carnivalesque colours: cheerful sunflower yellows, pale blues, deep greens, and salmon pinks. Many of the houses have tiny wrought iron balconies, some with tumbling red geraniums in pots, others with laundry casually strung out to dry, or smokers enjoying a quiet moment. There is a sense here of sleepy, small-town quiet. Yet then, without much warning, we turn a corner and once again meet the lively current of shoppers and selfie takers, which carries us into one or another of the city's grand plazas or plazas. Here, Seville's history as an ancient seaport and cultural melting pot under Roman and Arab rule is seen in the grand and sometimes discordant symphony of architecture, from Gothic towers and Baroque statues to Moorish domes and arches. Many of these beautiful buildings were built during Seville's golden age in the Renaissance, following Christopher Columbus's first encounter with the Americas. Our favourite building by far is the Real Alcazar, an ancient palace built by the Moorish rulers who occupied the peninsula from the 8th century onwards. This is a series of almost spiritual experiences, of cool, sculptural rooms and courtyards, beautifully and surprisingly aligned, of intricate, colourful mosaics, sun-warmed terracotta, and arabesque carvings and calligraphy. The air, as we drift through, is dry and cool, resonant with the sounds of water, the soft echo of footsteps, and the occasional sweet seep of birdsong from the vast, lush, and beautifully landscaped gardens beyond. We float through the palace a little like sleepwalkers, the bustle and heat of the outside world a fading memory. We have missed the spectacular and intensely scented blossoming of Seville's thousands of orange trees by just a few weeks. Yet although the weather is pleasingly mild, we can appreciate the welcoming shade that will be cast by their dark, glossy leaves among the city's quiet courtyards and grand plazas when the sun is at its fiercest. Although Seville oranges are too bitter to eat fresh and are much better enjoyed in a good marmalade, we find a cafe tucked in the corner of the Plata España that serves a deliciously sweet white wine mixed with Seville orange peel. And as we relax at a little cafe table set on the pale paving tiles of the plaza, we are lucky enough to catch a different, memorable Seville moment instead. The dusk-time dance of its swallows. We sit, faces tipped into the waning sunlight, as the small birds perform as though especially for us, swooping, climbing and wheeling joyfully in perfect synchrony, like a melody in flight. Although it is hard to bid its leafy boulevards goodbye, Seville is just a jumping-off point to the start of our 200-kilometre walk across the gently rolling fields and orchards of Extremadura, following the yellow waymarkers and strategically placed hostels of the Camino de Santiago de Compostela. And on the third morning, we plan to set out for the start of our chosen section, a small city called Merida. The Camino is a network of ancient routes dating back to the 8th century, travelled by the devout on their way to Santiago de Compostela in Spain's northern Galicia to worship at the remains of the Catholic martyr St. James. Recent years have seen pilgrim associations and local governments revive and rediscover various routes through France, Portugal and Spain, many parts of which had also been Roman trade routes. The most travelled path runs from and through the French Pyrenees, a great mountain range, taking walkers through snow at certain times of year. It has hostels smattered liberally along the way, simple stone or more modern affairs where pilgrims can lay down their sleeping bags and get a warm shower and a meal, and often plenty of wine too. The hostels along all of the routes are subsidised and kept affordable. Many are just €10 per night for a dormitory place. And waymarkers, often yellow arrows or scallop shell symbols painted on rocks and fences, mark the direction of travel. And while still an important draw for Christians, the way, as the Camino is often called, has become a beacon for people from other faiths and worldviews. It is a symbol of spiritual journey, a place to find what is needed in each heart, whether peace, inspiration, comfort, or closure. The French way can get a little congested, and at this time of year, in early spring, the chills of the high altitude make for thicker clothes and a heavier pack. So with our 10 precious days, we have chosen to walk the Via de la Plata. This is a quieter, more remote route that wends its way for more than 100 kilometers across 4 Spanish regions: Andalucía, Extremadura, Castilla y León, and Galicia, carrying travelers through spectacular and largely flat countryside, smattered with Roman ruins and medieval towns. Early the next morning, we hoist on our backpacks and take a bus from Seville's busy urban station to Merida, which sits along a pretty stretch of the way and is home to the world's longest surviving ancient bridge, dating back to Roman times. As we stand on one side of the blue-brown Guadiana River in the late morning warmth, ready to strike out across its light, age-worn stone blocks spanning 60 small arches, it feels like a fitting threshold for the coming 10 days. Crossing the river, we find a grassy park lining the far side of the riverbank, and in it our first port of call, a municipal hostel set up largely to host walkers of the way. It is here that we mean to present our official cards, or credencial del peregrino, for our first stamp. This is the document that was once the letter of safe conduct given to pilgrims walking the way in the Middle Ages, and now it both certifies that the Camino was accomplished for those walking the full route, and for us will prove our identities as genuine camineros, rather than casual vacationers at the subsidized guest houses and albergues along the way. We find the manager hanging pillowcases in the sun and exchange pleasantries in broken Spanish before he takes our cards and with a smile and a flourish stamps our certificate. Our Camino has begun. The first day's walk covers almost 20 kilometers, and once we have left the hot tarmac of the town, admiring the graceful blackened ruins of a Roman aqueduct on its outskirts, and then negotiate our way along and around a number of busy roads, the air begins to quiet and the countryside to unfurl. We walk at the side of long, quiet roads bordered by fields and light painted houses with terracotta tile roofs, and then off-road along the banks of a small brook. Periodically we spot either an official blue and yellow sign bearing the black silhouette of a figure with a walking stick, or we catch sight of smaller yellow arrows discreetly drawn on rocks, posts and fences. We barely need to look at our map. Shortly before midday, we find the way branching off into a sandy path that borders a large, quiet lake. Its still waters perfectly mirror the cornflower blue of the afternoon sky, and as we walk quietly along the lakeside, we can hear little other than bird song, the sandy crush of our footsteps, and the odd peep of a moorhen. We sit down for a while on its banks to enjoy the sunshine and eat a picnic lunch of olives, crackers and tin pate. We then lie back, listening to the faint sound of the bees hovering amid nearby clumps of clover and the gentle lap of the lake water onto the shore. After a good rest, we pick ourselves and our packs up and pace steadily again for the remainder of the afternoon, beyond the lake, through the shade of oak and olive trees, and past fields brimming with bright yellow flowers. Just as the sun begins to perceptibly weaken, the road takes us into the modest village of Aljucen and up to a whitewashed little building. It has a blue gate, a red geranium in a terracotta pot, and a small sun-dappled courtyard around the back, in which a small collection of walkers have already made headway into a bottle of wine and, spotting us, beckon us over cheerfully in at least 3 different languages. This day sets the tone for many days to come. The routine becomes a familiar balm, almost meditative in its motions. We rise early and quietly from among the slumbering, rumbling pilgrims in the dormitory, shower and pack, grab the simple breakfast left by the guest house, fill our water bottles, lace up our hiking boots, and before we know it, we are out in the cold, misty air of morning and starting to walk off the ache from the day before. On our favourite day of the walk, we wake in the small town of Valdesalor and strike out early, as usual, for the medieval city of Cáceres. The sun is bright this morning, and it is quickly burning the mist from the grass verges and gardens that we pass on our way to open countryside. As we walk down the middle of the quiet main road, we pass a smattering of village dogs out for their morning perambulation. One in particular is hard to miss, a giant lumbering St. Bernard with big mournful eyes and a ridiculous grin, who bounds up to us to be petted. The dog revels in our fuss and lumbers around us as we walk, occasionally threatening to unbalance one or the other of us under our packs in his enthusiasm. But he does not turn around, and after many attempts to dissuade and dodge him over the course of the next 2 hours, we finally decide to accept his companionship, guessing that perhaps this may be a routine of his. Should this unexpected spirit guide walk with us all the way to Cáceres, we decide, we can call the hostel and the owner can find a way to collect him. The way soon turns off the main road and guides the three of us down smaller paved roads bordered by rough stone walls. These mainly contain olive groves, the trunks pale and leaves dark and verdant, surrounded by carpets of white and yellow blossoms. There are also groves of mature oak trees, the spaces between them used to cultivate cereals or to graze goats and sheep. The air is peaceful, cut only by distant birdsong, a light breeze, and the occasional whine of an insect. The path ahead crosses a number of fields and starts to follow a fence, beyond which are a number of small ponds and grazing cows. The way here is marshier, and we hop over small tributaries and brooks. At one point, we notice the ground covered in a liberal and curious coating of vivid, small black and orange furred caterpillars, giving the impression that they had recently come down with a particularly fierce, mythical rain. We, at least the two of us, pick our way through them as carefully as we can. Our friend Bernard, as we have christened him, walks placidly through. Periodically we turn to find him padding contentedly a few steps behind, breaking rank only to sniff at the foot of trees or interesting clumps of grass, and to bark warningly at the occasional stray dog. The rhythmic pace of our walking is meditative, and our skin feels warm under the spring sunshine. Other than occasional quiet exchanges, we walk in comfortable silence, wrapped in our own thoughts and in the pastoral beauty of the landscape. With about 14 kilometers down and about 4 to go to Cáceres, we decide to branch off our path slightly, traverse a bridge over a gentle river, and enter into a small, pretty village that is perched on a little hillock to our right. Choosing the small cobbled pathways at random, we wend our way upwards, past low-rise houses and retaining walls, painted in pretty white and pastel shades. All is completely quiet, not a soul in sight, until we come to a small farmacia. The chemist inside explains that it is, of course, siesta time, and that he is closing soon, but that the local cafe would still be open for coffee and simple snacks if we wanted to try that. Following his directions, we emerge from the narrow alleyways into a small cobbled square with a little church painted the colour of freshly churned butter, 4 plane trees, and a small bench. we find the cafe, a large, quiet and dimly lit building used both as a social space and a daily sundries shop, and we rest for a while, sipping coffee and eating crusty pre-prepared tostadas with cheese. With our new friend lying contentedly outside the door with a bowl of water, we decide that this may need to be the point of separation from each other, and, with the help of the cafe owner, we call the guest house we left that morning and get a message through to the dog's owner. We find that we were right. This is not the first time that the big dog has absconded with Camino walkers, and the exasperated tone of the hostelier makes us laugh. With the cafe owner kindly agreeing to hold the dog in her backyard until his owner arrives, we bid Bernard a fond goodbye and strike back out into the bright sunlight. The final stretch towards Cáceres crests a number of gentle, dusty hills, smattered with grazing sheep, wild flowers, and the odd plastic bag. The wind has picked up and tugs at our shirts, but the sun is still bright and warm, though approaching the late afternoon stage of its arc. Far below us, we see the gentle swell of a medieval city in a pleasing Mediterranean palette of white, beige and terracotta with strips and pockets of green, fringed by modern buildings and low apartment blocks, all starting to take on a slightly golden tone. We start to descend towards it. Our guest house for the evening is in the grand Plaza Mayor, or main plaza, of Cáceres, and an hour later the ancient city unfurls upwards under our tired and slowing feet as we marvel at the deeply quaint turn and texture of its narrow streets and the lovely varied shapes, archways, turrets and domes, of its old buildings. It is Easter Saturday, and tomorrow we have been promised the sight of passionate, flower-strewn religious processions that date back to the 16th century, with musicians, elaborate floats, and slightly sinister hooded figures wielding staves. But for the time being, 2 footsore and weary walkers are perhaps most excited by the prospect of a warm shower and a fresh set of clothes. The day is still relatively young, however, and the sun still relatively high, and we also know that for the sake of tradition, our tired feet will then very likely be willing to carry us back into the sun-flooded plaza for a cold, well-deserved glass of sparkling wine and a toast to the Camino de Santiago, the days past and the days remaining, and our old dear friend Bernard, wherever he may be.